Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today in the second of our RX 7800 XT partner card reviews, our attention turns to Gigabyte and their gaming OC model. This card actually features the most aggressive factory overclock of any partner card we've seen so far, with a 2565 MHz boost clock. It also supports dual BIOS, has a beefy triple fan cooler, as well as a smattering of RGB lighting. Hitting the UK market at £529, it's time to see exactly what this card is capable of and how well it compares against the PowerColor Hellhound that we reviewed just a few short days ago. Diving into it then with a look at the design of the card, this will be instantly familiar to you if you've seen any other Gigabyte gaming OC model from this generation. The shroud is almost entirely black with just a couple of grey accents, while it does feature some, circuit board style traces and other design elements that just add a little bit of visual interest. It's obviously sporting a triple fan setup as well, part of Gigabyte's WindForce cooling solution. Each fan measures 90mm in diameter, while the central fan actually spins in reverse, a common feature designed to reduce airflow turbulence. In terms of the dimensions as well, the gaming OC measures in at 302 by 130 by 56mm, so it is fairly long and almost a triple slot thickness, but of course it's not going to be something as big as the likes of the 4090 gaming OC. On my scales as well, it weighed in at 1,327 grams. As for the front side of the card, this is home to a glossy plastic section, and we can see the Gigabyte logo housed within it, and this acts as the only RGB zone on the card. This uses a rainbow style effect out of the box, but this can be configured using Gigabyte's control center if you want to do so. Flipping over to the backplate then, this is a full-length design that is made out of a grey metal. We can see the Gigabyte logo is printed in white text, while there is a very small cutout right at the end of the card to allow some air to pass straight out of the heatsink. But as this is so small, I'm really not sure it's going to be doing that much for the cooling performance. I mentioned dual BIOS support in the introduction as well, and we can see that switch is positioned next to those two power inputs. You get a choice of either the OC or silent modes, and they are otherwise identical, sharing the same clock and power targets, but the only difference is the fan curve. However, I do test both later in this video. As I alluded to there, power is supplied by two 8-pin connectors, though for display outputs we get two HDMI 2.1 and two DisplayPort 2.1, so that's an extra HDMI or one less DisplayPort than we typically see. Opening up the card to take a look at the PCB then, it looks like Gigabyte is using a fairly vanilla reference style PCB here, certainly in terms of the VRM. We find an 11+3 layout, while 70 amp monolithic power systems MP87997 MOSFETs are used throughout, and there's also a trio of monolithic MP2856 controllers utilised as well. For the cooler, Gigabyte has deployed two aluminium fin stacks connected by a total of 7 6mm copper heat pipes. The GPU and memory make contact with a copper baseplate, while there are some smaller secondary baseplates used to cool the VRM. So that is basically everything you need to know about the card and its design, and now we're going to move on to testing. For this, we of course used our regular GPU test system, which is provided to us by PC Specialist. This is based on Intel's i9-3900KS CPU, paired with the Gigabyte Z790 Gaming X AX motherboard, and we've got 32GB of Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB DDR5 memory. Starting off our testing then with a look at the thermal performance, these results do look good at first viewing for the gaming OC. The OC BIOS runs the coolest out of the box of any RX 7800 XT card we've tested so far, with a GPU temperature of 58 degrees and a hotspot of 81. The silent BIOS does run hotter as we'd expect, this time hitting 68 degrees and 91 degrees respectively, but that is still a good chunk better than the reference design. Those out-of-the-box thermal results though don't take noise levels into the equation, and the gaming OC is the loudest of the 7800 XTs we've tested, including AMD's reference design. The OC BIOS hit 41 decibels on our sound meter, with the fan spinning at 41% or 1740 RPM. The silent BIOS is quieter as its fans targeted a 30% or 1200 RPM speed, and that came in at 37 decibels. 41 dBA is definitely a bit louder than I'd like, and it is getting to the point where you would hear the GPU over your case fans, and even using the silent BIOS, the gaming OC isn't as whisper quiet as the likes of the Nitro Plus or the Powercolor Hellhound. For our noise normalized testing then, we set the gaming OC's fan speed to 39% or 1630 RPM and retested thermal performance. This saw the GPU hit 59 degrees with the hotspot at 81. That does mean it is an improvement over the reference card in terms of the noise normalized thermals, though the Nitro Plus and Hellhound both deliver superior results. It's important to remember, however, that this testing doesn't take differences in power into account. The gaming OC has the highest power target of all 4 GPUs tested, and this will contribute towards higher thermals too. We can see that higher power target in play here when looking at power draw from Cyberpunk 2077. Both the OC and silent BIOS actually share the same power target, and both drew just under 295 watts under load. That's more than even the Sapphire Nitro Plus, and about 50 watts more than the AMD reference card. That increased power draw also directly relates to the extra clock speed that Gigabyte has been able to extract from the GPU. Over our 30-minute stress test, the OC BIOS averaged 2508 MHz, making it 174 MHz or 7% faster than the AMD reference card. It's also 60 MHz faster than the next best partner card, being the Sapphire Nitro Plus. Incidentally, while both the OC and silent BIOS do share the same rated boost clock of 2565 MHz, the silent BIOS does run a bit hotter, causing GPU frequency to come in about 30 MHz slower in the real world. Because the 7800 XT therefore is the most aggressively clocked 7800 XT partner card we've seen so far, it stands to reason that it also offers the greatest performance gains over the reference card. We're still not talking huge leaps in performance here for our gaming benchmarks, but gains of 4 to 5% in the titles we tested are measurable. I personally wouldn't see this as much of a selling point, as it's hardly a revolutionary step forward, but perhaps it is something to consider depending on your priorities. Unsurprisingly though, that increased power draw does result in diminished efficiency. The gaming OC is on par with the Nitro Plus here, but performance per watt is 12% worse than the reference 7800 XT. Moving on to talk about overclocking then. For the RX 7800 XT, we maximise the power limit as well as the clock speed slider, and then it basically comes down to how far can you undervolt the GPU and how much more frequency can you add to the memory. In the case of the gaming OC, the GPU was stable at 960 millivolts, while we increased the memory speed to 2640 MHz or 21.12 gigabits per second effective. This saw the real-world clock speed jump up by about 330 MHz or so, hitting 2841 MHz over our 30-minute stress test, and this was 100% stable in my testing. That extra GPU and memory frequency then netted us gains of between 9 to 10% in the 3 titles we retested. It's not quite as big as a jump forward as we saw from the Powercolor Hellhound, but you do have to remember that the gaming OC had a larger factory overclock to begin with. Unsurprisingly though, power draw has risen by a fair chunk with this overclock, hitting 340 watts, which is a 16% increase in power. Considering that 16% increase while performance only rose by 10%, we do see worsened efficiency when running this overclock, as performance per watt falls by 7% compared to the stock gaming OC, while it's 18% less efficient than a stock clocked reference 7800 XT. With all that testing done then, I think it's fair to say that the Gigabyte Gaming OC 7800 XT is a solid card and makes a few decent improvements over the reference design, though there are a few other areas to consider. Primarily, the main thing for me all comes back to that power limit, which Gigabyte has cranked up significantly. I measured this card pulling almost 300 watts in Cyberpunk 2077, so that's almost a 50 watt increase over the reference card. Now, the good news of this approach is that it does mean clock speed is the highest of any 7800 XT we've seen so far, so this card comes in between 4 to 5% faster than the reference card in our game benchmarks, and we were able to add another 10% on top of that via overclocking. There is, however, a downside to this approach, being more power of course equals more heat, so the cooler has to work that bit harder. In our testing, I didn't see the gaming OC run hot, but it was a bit louder than I'd like, as the fans have to spin up to compensate for that extra power draw. For instance, using the OC BIOS, it hit 41 decibels on our sound meter, compared to something like the Power Color Hellhound, which only measured in at 33 decibels of noise. Likewise, noise normalized thermals were a fair degree worse than the Power Color Hellhound and the Sapphire Nitro Plus, though it was still better than the AMD reference card. In terms of pricing then, here in the UK, the gaming OC has an MSRP of £529, making it £50 or 10% more expensive than the AMD reference design. It certainly is a decent improvement over said AMD reference, and I think it will particularly appeal to those who just want the best performance out of the box without having to do any manual tinkering. That being said, compared to the Power Color Hellhound, which is actually £10 cheaper here in the UK, that card is also significantly quieter and runs 9 degrees cooler when noise normalized. For me, at £529, the gaming OC is just a bit hotter and a bit louder than I would have liked for something at this price point. However, there is a plot twist, and that is if you are watching this from the US. That's because I actually saw the gaming OC on sale for $499 at both Newegg and Best Buy. That means the gaming OC is effectively an MSRP card over in the States, at which point I think it becomes a bit of a no-brainer. It's a significant improvement over the AMD reference card for what appears to be the same price. I just recommend setting a manual fan curve so you can have slightly lower noise levels. That is going to do it for this video though, guys, so if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts on this card down in the comments below. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and ding that notification bell so you can stay up to date whenever we upload a new video. And if you'd love to come and carry on the conversation with us in our Discord server, that is again linked in the description. While there, you can pick up a brand new t-shirt on our merch store, and if you're feeling particularly generous, why not consider backing us on Patreon. That's it for this one though, guys. I'm Dominic for Geek Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.